Good morning, everyone. My name is Maggie Lee, Senior Governance Coordinator here at GRI. I'd like to welcome everyone to the meeting of the Global Sustainability Standards Board, known as its acronym as the GSSB, held on the 5th of April 2016. This in-person meeting is being hosted from the GRI Secretariat Office here in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Present from the GRI Secretariat today are Tina Jensen, and joining us and from the Standards Division are Katja Kriege, Chelsea Reinhardt, and Bastian Bach, Seat Director of the Standards Division. We will now start the roll call with the GSSB members. And if you could just repeat your name, just mention your name after I've called you out. First is Mr. Daniel Ingram.
Present.
Mr. David Russell.
Yes, David's here.
Mr. Dwight Justice.
Yes.
Mr. Hidemi Tomita.
Yes, I'm here.
Ms. Judy Kozewski.
Yes, good morning.
Mr. Jürgen Buchsbaum.
I'm here. Good morning.
Jorge Daniel Tayant.
Present.
Ms. Kirsten Margreet Hovey.
Yes, I'm here.
Mr. Michael Nugent.
Present.
Mr. Robin Edmain.
Present.
Mr. Simeon Cheng.
Present.
Mr. Stian van Draag.
Good morning, present.
And Ms. Salema Pioli.
Hi, good morning.
And Mr. Vadabakath Nankumar.
Hi, good morning, present. Thank you.
And Mr. Eric Hespenheider.
Yes, I'm here.
Well, thank you, everyone. I will now hand it over to Eric to open the meeting.
Good, thank you, Maggie, and welcome everyone to today's meeting. Appreciate we have our full complement of board members present, so I thank the board for making the effort to be here. Just a quick review of today's agenda as published on their website and as a reminder for the board. We'll do some introductory remarks in the beginning, followed by the formal approval of a series of our board meetings that have now been summarized in the meeting materials. So we'll get through that. And also I would point out that to the extent that there are further improvements or enhancements that we can make to either the minutes in terms of how we've made note of our discussion and most importantly our decisions, as well as other elements of the process, we will, as one of our private sessions on Thursday, have the opportunity to provide additional feedback to the Secretariat with regard to our process and the terminology. So keep that in mind as we go through, particularly the course of today. This will be followed with an introduction of our transition to standards. As you know, most of our effort has been focused around making the transition from the G4 guidelines to a series of interrelated standards. Bastian Buck will take us through a brief introduction of the summary of the changes that we've been discussing over the last few months, and then we'll get into more of the detail. Be followed by a session. If you recall, we did appoint a technical ad hoc committee to help us with the employer-employee worker terminology, and so we have a report from that ad hoc committee with regard to some suggestions for us to take into consideration. I would note that the minutes erroneous indicated that we would be approving that report from the ad hoc committee. It is simply for our information. The actual approval of any changes that would be suggested by an ad hoc committee will be taken up in the individual discussion of those standards or what the topic relates to. So there will be no formal action with regard to acceptance or we'll accept the work of the ad hoc committee, but we won't actually approve it, so it has no particular standing in that regard. We'll follow morning break. We'll talk about, importantly, work our way through each of the standards that we are intending to seek the board's approval for today or during the course of our meetings this week, so that we can put them out for public commentary later this month as published in our work plan previously. So we'll have the discussion of the foundation standard. We'll, after lunch, talk about the general disclosures, the management approach, and then the topic-specific standards. If you recall, these are intended to be illustrative of what the remaining set of topic-specific standards will look like, which will form the second tranche of standards that we'll be looking at seeking the board's approval for public commentary at our next meeting. We also have a discussion this afternoon on the glossary and key terms, so that we can hopefully have defined at least how the GSSB chooses to define terminology that is used throughout the standards. And then I'll summarize at the end of the day. For purposes of discussion, the agenda for Wednesday and Thursday are private and closed sessions of the GSSB board. They are to cover background briefing materials for future projects, and not yet, certainly no decisions will be made at those. It's simply information for the board, as well as some administrative matters that we need to cover. So that'll be our agenda for today. Most importantly, the public meeting, where we are expecting to make some decisions with regard to the exposure draft approval, and then the background briefing on the next 2 days. To the extent that, or under the circumstances that we do need more time for deliberation and discussion before coming to a conclusion on any of these matters in the public meeting, we do have the opportunity, and I think we've now indicated on the public website, that if we need to extend, we will reconvene on a public at what time?
We have 2 slots for that on Wednesday, and that would be, excuse me, on Wednesday from 1:45 to 5:30. That's the first slot that we have the possibility to open again for a public meeting. And on Thursday morning from 9 to 12:15. And I should indicate that that is Central European Time, Amsterdam, the Netherlands.
So it is not, so don't read into that for the board that I expect that we'll need that. I expect that we'll get through all of our work today, but in the event that we do need to reopen a public session, we have the time slots as Bastian just indicated, and the ability to do that. So we'd keep that in mind. So any comments with regard to the agenda? Any concerns from the board? No? Okay. So the other items that we intend to cover in this section would be the minute approvals. So those would be items under item 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the meeting materials. So I would note that those have been previously made available to the board. Any corrections, adjustments? As I previously indicated, to the extent that as we have worked our way through this, if there are additional suggestions on how we can improve the minutes, we certainly are open to that, and we have a session on Thursday to take those comments. So, a question? You need, please, if you could push your button there. Yes, thank you.
2 minute things to think about,
Yes.
I have no specific comments to the minutes, but one general comment, and that is that it is challenging to review 3 or 4 minutes in a row for the same meeting and over such a long time span. That decreases significantly the review process.
Yeah, acknowledged, and we will strive to get the draft minutes as originally envisioned. We would be only the most recent meeting behind, and so this will be unfortunately, this is a catch-up situation for us, but I do recognize the challenge of trying to reflect back to the November, December as to whether these are accurately reflective of what we said. The benefit is that it's all recorded, so if anybody really wants to challenge it, they can go back and listen to the specifics of what was actually said during the course of the meetings. So, any further discussion about the minutes? So I would move that we formally approve these 4 sets of minutes, and I would prefer to do that, I will assume, unless someone objects. Seeing no objection, then we'll take it as a unanimous decision by the board to accept these minutes as final. Okay. All right. So I have a couple other things that I wanted to make mention of, particularly now, just in this session. You may have seen previously that there was a press release by the Corporate Reporting Dialogue, the CRD, last week with regard to a paper on materiality. GRI is a member of the CRD and was an active participant in the development of that materiality paper. And so I would encourage you all to read it, and you can certainly, we can certainly discuss it at some point in the future, particularly when we take up the question of materiality, perhaps. But I would note that I believe it appropriately sets forth the idea that materiality is very much dependent upon what we're talking about, and so it requires the context, that there is no one-size-fits-all definition of materiality. It all needs to be taken into a consideration as to what is the subject matter. And so the paper, I think, does that. Could argue it could do it better, but at least it's a good start. It also sets forth 7 of the 8 members of the CRD and how they themselves, for their purposes, the context in which they use the term materiality, is set forth. The exception to that is the Financial Accounting Standards Board, FASB in the U.S., is still working on their definition of materiality, so they did not include one in this particular document. Could come through as a supplement in the future once they have that. So I just make note that paper is there, and would encourage, as people ask you questions about, how does GRI define materiality and how does it relate to all these other organizations, it is, I think, a reasonable reference document to help people try to understand how materiality can vary and does vary depending on the use of the term in a particular reporting context. So anything else? Oh yeah, sorry. One of the other items that I wanted to cover in this opening session was, you'll recall that in our terms of reference, we have a specific requirement for the GSSB to prepare an annual report of its activities. And so one of the things that I would ask for light discussion on, if we could, or at least perhaps a consensus, we have, since this is our opening period, and I won't say year, but an opening period, the question is, what do we want to use as our annual period? If you recall our discussion previously as it related to the terms, member terms, we have used the calendar basis for determining our terms for each of us as serving as board members. The fiscal period, financial period for the GSSB matches that of the GRI, since it is part of the administrative structure of GRI. So the question is, how do we want to think about our annual reporting period? My personal recommendation is that we keep it to a calendar basis, which is in keeping with our terms in which we're sitting. And so then, if that is where we go, then the question is, when did it start? And do we have to do a calendar 2015 report? Again, my recommendation is that we do a calendar 16 report that happens to cover 13 months or 14 months since the first public meeting of the GSSB was in November of 2015. And so that would cause us to have our first annual accounting would be sometime in the first quarter, let's say, first calendar quarter of 2017. So any thoughts, any concerns about adopting that as our initial reporting period for our activities? No? Okay, so seeing no objection, then we will instruct the Secretariat to help us develop our first annual accounting of our activities with the expectation that at the meeting perhaps a year from now would be when we have it. I would also note that, all of our proceedings are in the public domain, so recordings of all of our meetings and all of these are already there. What this is intended to do is to be hopefully a concise summary of those activities and actions. So, okay, good. Well, thank you for that. Anything else I forget? No? Okay. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get started with our agenda item 1.2. So Bastian, I think this will be covered under item 5 of the materials. So Bastian?
Yes, thank you, Eric. So the idea of the first session on the transition to standards is to give you an overview again of the materials and of the status quo. So what we're moving into with in this meeting. This is also for the benefit of those that listen in and will listen later to the recording. It is quite a volume of documents that we will wade through today, and just to organize it and make reference to where you find information related to the decisions that we ask you to take today. I should mention at the outset of this session that there are a couple of additional papers that have been distributed. There is, first of all, an addendum to item 6, and that will be for session 1.3, the update on employee worker project that has been distributed is also available on the website. Furthermore, we have an overview of the GSSB decisions and standard division action items related to the transition to standards that is available to you. And also on request of the GSSB, a list of the consolidated shell statements in the first set of public exposure drafts. That's a handy reference also for the discussions today. Again, we will revert back to that point in a moment. But there is an important difference in the GI standards going forward between requirements, recommendations, and guidance. And for you as a reference regarding the shell statements that are made in the set of documents that you're looking at today, we've put together this document as a reference.
Bastian, if I could. So we seem to have a technical problem with our live streaming, so I think we need to take a pause so we can restart. Is that? So, okay. Apparently it was streaming very poorly, so, well.
Just a side note, it's hard to capture the nods because sometimes it sounds like you're just speaking and we're not saying anything, but there actually is sort of a physical reaction. I don't know if there's a way to capture that when you're streaming, but.
Well, I can acknowledge that everyone's nodding yes, so.
Nods the green all around.
We're all asleep, even though some of us.
Is this a plea for video recording?
No. No one's voting for that,
So
Bastian.
give us a heads up when we're back on.
It will just sound like Eric's talking to himself. From
But,
Yes.
yeah. Okay, so apologize for that pause. Hopefully, the quality of the transmission is okay now? No? Okay, we'll find out. All right, so Bastian, please.
Thank you, Eric. So during the sessions 1.2, 1.9, we will be covering items 5 to 13, including item 6 addendum that was shared with you. And for your benefit, the Standards Division has put together the item 5 that has to be highlighted as the document that connects the dots and importantly also connects to the discussions that you had in the public in the virtual meetings in the first 3 months of this year. So decisions taken on individual versions of the exposure drafts prior to this meeting and then changes that happened between those meetings and now, they're presented in item number 5. We will call out key changes for each individual item in the individual sessions. But if there are any questions during the day, I would like to direct you to item 5, where you find a succinct summary of all the changes for the individual items. We will start with an update on the employee worker terminology in session 1.3. And as Eric has said in the earlier session, please note that these are presented for information and discussion, not for approval at this point in time. Particular focus in the session 1.3 will be G410, and that is the item 6 addendum, where you have a number of options outlined for you, but we will present them also, Katja will present them in her presentation. For each of the exposure drafts in the following sessions, please note that the key changes are highlighted in the comment boxes throughout the document. So when we go through the documents, that's your first point of reference regarding how these contents came about. But also at the back end of the document, in the annex, you find an overview or a summary of changes in their totality. So these are two additional reference points for you. Item 5 has set out 3 specific areas for further GSSB discussion. One was related to the introduction text of the foundation standard. One was related to the additional text added to the definition of boundary. And one was related to the slightly revised structure of the management approach. We have received commentary from several GSSB members prior to the meeting. We had asked you to outline any substantial concerns that you have with the documents. Overall, I think it is fair to state that the feedback was positive about the current state of affairs and the status of the documents. We have received wording suggestions and also a couple of substantive concerns. And what we will do throughout the sessions today, for each individual exposure draft, we will highlight where we have received wording suggestions and how we go about that, and we will outline a procedure for that, as well as the substantive concerns that have been highlighted by GSSB members. It is important that when we come to the point that the team presents an individual exposure draft, and the points raised in the feedback shared by GSB members prior to this meeting, that the members that have submitted feedback can confirm that the Standards Division is representing the feedback in the right way, and also elaborate if needed on the feedback that they've provided. And secondly, if there are any other substantive concerns at this stage that they're highlighted at this point in time, this will allow us to move through the sequence of discussions. One last note then is about the worker-employee section. We have that first on the agenda, and that is also because contents and suggestions that are coming from this process come back in the individual exposure drafts. There's one discussion item open still, and that is G410, but there are several instances where the technical committee has looked at the use of the worker-employee terminology in the exposure drafts that are presented to you. And we want to give you that background at the beginning of the day because these instances come back and they are highlighted in the documents later. I think I will leave it at that. Are there any additions from you, Eric, regarding process on how to handle?
No, I think you've covered it well. I would just emphasize the point that we have taken on board and have received the comments from the various board members, which we're highly appreciative of. Would be even more appreciative if we get them really timely and not at the last minute. But it's a process thing, and hopefully we can get better at that. But to the extent that, again, as you've seen on the agenda, we were hopeful that we've gotten through all of the really tough discussions and negotiations and compromise to get to today, and that what we're left with are those things that are either critically important from a board member's point of view, and there are a few of those, and then editorial changes. And I would just note that to the extent that we have received and will potentially continue to receive some editorial comments with regard to use of words and so on that doesn't change the intent. One of the suggestions that I'd like to make to the board is that some of them are actually quite useful because it does help clarify and so on. And so we're not trying to say that we're not going to accept some changes going forward. But one of the things I'd like your indulgence on is that if we can get through all of the substantive issues and say, yes, this is in substance what we want to go out with an exposure draft on, then we'll leave it to the Secretariat, and then with my concurrence, what changes we would make to the actual text from what you've seen to what would actually go out in the exposure draft. And so, I think we'll have we can bring that to life, I think, make that a bit clearer as we get into some of the comments that we've received. So, but the idea is, otherwise we're faced with the distinct possibility, and I'm not suggesting that we can't do this, but if we can't reach agreement on approving any of these or one or more of these for public exposure, and all want to see the final, then it's going to delay our process, and which is fine because we've all committed to making it a quality process. What I'm suggesting is that there may be a middle ground of acceptance of those that are not changing the content or substantive changes, but are actually improvements in the language, that the Secretariat make that determination with my concurrence, as a final review prior to publication. So, okay. Anything else? No. Okay. So I think we'll take it up with item number 6, and Katja.
Can I get this? Cheers. Good morning, everyone. Let's check if this is loud enough. Okay, so what I would like to present to you today is the update on the Employee Worker Terminology Review project. And as you recap, the aim of this project was to review the employee and worker-related terminology in the G4 guidelines and see how they can be best aligned with key reference documents such as the ILO instruments. What I would like to go through with you today is a general project update, so what has been done, what still needs to be done in this project, and then look at the results that are relevant for the first set of the draft sustainability reporting standards. So some key general observations that we have come up with, and also an overview of the specific suggested revisions for the disclosures relevant for the first set of draft standards. Then, as a last point, I would also like to present to you different scenarios for G410, as it has already been announced. So first, on a little recap on the project. So with this project, we have followed the due process. We have convened a technical committee consisting of 3 members. It's Emily Sims from the ILO, Alessandra Ascenza from the IOE and Dwight Justice from ITUC, who is also as a GSSB member in the room with us today. The updates of the employee worker terminology project could also be seen on this project website, how we have moved through the different phases. And as you can see, we are currently in the phase of revising the draft sustainability reporting standards text. So there has been quite some ground covered, and the TSC has put much hard work and dedication into this project so far. There has been a conceptual challenge with the contents, and that is that it turned out there isn't any readily available definition of the term worker who could simply replace all the instances in the G4 guidelines or in the GRI standards that currently use worker-related terminology. If you have a look on where we are, so far the technical committee has reviewed 105 instances in the GRI guideline that include this terminology to decide whether employee or broader worker-related term should be used, also cleaned up language. And what I would like to present to you today are the suggested specific revisions for the instances that are included in the first set of draft system reporting standards, including also the different scoping options for the term worker-related terminology in G410. And the further work concerns the second set of draft system reporting standards, and those suggestions will be shared with the GSSB leading up to the meeting in May. So I would like to focus now on what is important regarding the first set of the draft system reporting standards. And there are some key considerations and observations that I would like to share. So first, if we have a quick look at the terminology, employee is a legal term which is defined in each country by national law or its application and can be used as such in the GRI standards. Worker is a broader term, so it is a person who performs work. Now it is broader in the sense that it includes employees, but also other workers beyond employees. For example, it may also include workers of other organizations such as suppliers. Now, in the exercise to align the GRI standards text with key references of the terminology, the idea is to make sure that it elicits information on sustainability impacts and that it covers the significant groups affected by these impacts. So, should this be employees or workers or specific groups of workers? This is one of the key questions. And that is context specific in each disclosure. So the scope of group that you would like to cover might differ from one disclosure to the other. So that led to the challenge to scope out or narrow down which type of workers beyond employees should be included in disclosures which have quantitative reporting requirements, because there one needs a head count, or the reporting organization need to head count who to report on, and there it's pose a particular challenge. So we would come back on this challenge to scope out when we present the different options for G410 in a moment. First, I would like to present you with an overview of the specific suggestions. Those are captured in item number 6. There are 24 instances that have been reviewed. 7 of them include disclosure requirements. That means the other instances relate to guidance text. Out of these 7 disclosures that include requirements, no changes have been suggested by the technical committee to 6 of them. And there is one outstanding disclosure which includes disclosure requirements, that is G410. It's outstanding in the sense that we have different options here to present on the question which types of workers should be reported on beyond employees in G410. So as some general notes to G410, I would like to recap that the TEC's mandate, so the technical committee's mandate, has been restricted to clarify which terminology and phrasing related to employee and workers should be used. So this means the technical committee did not review, for example, the matter of breakdowns by gender and region. There are three options that we are going to present, and these options differ according to the scope of worker that should be considered and reported on, next to the reporting of key figures on employees. So let's have a look at G410 and the original text as a starting point. Oh,
Yeah, before we get it, just as just a point of emphasis. So, there is a table in the document, item 6, with regard to these 24 instances of where the terminology is used, with an indication as to whether it was changed or not changed, and it's highlighted by which are the disclosure requirements and which are part of guidance. So I would note that, and appreciate the ad hoc technical committee's help with making suggestions, and the ones that are being suggested are by and large in the guidance as opposed to disclosure, with the exception of G410, which we're about to discuss, right? So,
Yes.
yeah. So, but I would note that I want to make sure we have appreciation to the technical ad hoc committee for helping us get the alignment of our terminology in these instances, and then we'll have a further review of the specifics in the next tranche of topic-specific standards, right, where they would also be covered. Because I'm assuming that's the
Exactly.
difference between the 105 and the 24, is all the other ones that we haven't looked at the details yet, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. So, as I mentioned, there are three options which differ in regards to which workers beyond employees is reported on. Option 1 focuses on workers involved in core activities. Option 2 focuses on workers performing work that is controlled by the reporting organization or who are working at sites controlled by the reporting organization. And option 3 is an option that does not require quantified reporting on workers beyond employees. So option 1 and 2 include quantitative reporting requirements regarding specific type of workers. This is something I would like you to bear in mind. And also I would like to share that option 1, the focus on workers involved in core activities, is the technical committee's preferred option.
So, Katja, I'd also point out there is an option not to change anything and just carry over what we have.
I'm sorry, Eric?
So we have the option of not adopting any of these option 1, 2, or 3 and just carry over what we have, the current terminology and from the G410 as it currently exists.
Of course. So this is what you see on the next slide is option number 1, where you see in the light blue text that the substantial portion of workers or substantial portion of the organization's core activities is performed by workers who are not employees is transparently reported, and then E is the requirement to report the total number of workers who are not employees who are involved in the core activities by region disaggregated by gender. So the light blue text is something that changes across the different options. Here, the advantage of this option is that it narrows down the scope of workers to those, as mentioned, involved in core activities. What still needs to be investigated is how easily is it for reporting organizations to distinguish between what are the core activities and who's involved there and not core activities. Option number 2, here in light blue, narrows down the reporting on workers performing work that is controlled by the reporting organization or who are working at sites controlled by the reporting organization. Here a challenge is how control can be understood as a term. Control should be understood as the control of working methods and working output. And option number 3, here is a shorter disclosure since it does skip the quantification on specific workers who are not employees. So he does still elicit information on whether a substantial portion of the organization's work is performed by workers who are not employees, but it does not ask for further quantification of specific workers. So these are the three different options. Option number 3, I would also like to add, though, that it does shorten the reporting requirement compared to the current disclosure as we have it in G410. And I think I would like to pass on to Eric to open the floor for questions regarding these 3 options and also discussion.
Yeah. So just to try to be clear, in each of these options, it potentially introduces new terminology that would require new terms that may require definition. So currently under G410, we have this idea of workforce, which is not a defined term. In option 1, we introduce the idea of core activities, which we also have not defined. In the case of option 3 here, it's probably the clearest in that it limits it to those that are actually employees, which is a defined term. I'm not quite sure what the under option 3 what the organization work is defined. Again, it's an undefined. So we have part of our challenge is, how much do we want to effort do we want to put into defining the boundaries, because that's essentially what this amounts to, is how do we define the boundaries for these things to give meaningful guidance as to what we're after with the, even under option 3, because we have opened this idea that what portion of the work is done, of the organization work, is done by non-employees as defined. So it's a bit challenging. I think it's worthy of a discussion as to how we want to address this, but we have not, the task force, the technical advisory, technical ad hoc committee did not, as I understand it, come up with definitions for these new terms that are introduced in each of these options, right?
Yes, so there are established definitions of core activities out there in business dictionaries. The term organizations work, that is not included in option 1, but in option 2 and 3, is a term that is in the G4 guidelines, but it is not further defined. So some technical committee members would support this term too if it was further defined, which it is currently not.
Okay, so we'll open up for questions, and please signal. Judy?
I think possibly it's just to add to what you've just been talking about, Eric. This term "substantial" I also find slightly difficult to report whether a substantial portion of the organization's work, core activities, what have you, is performed by certain types of people. I doubt it's the only place in G4 that the word substantial is used, but I also find it quite sort of, if you put a lot of these together in the same statement, the whole thing becomes a bit unclear to me. I don't have a resolution to it. Thank you.
Could be ambiguous. Newcomer?
Good morning, Nankumar here. I'm not in favor of option 1 because the core activities is not the place where the significant sustainability impact occurs. The significant sustainability impact in my assessment over the last 5 to 6 years, what we have seen is non-core activities. So since the impact occurs in non-core activities, the reporting organizations will miss out the reporting the impacts. So I'm not in favor of option 1. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Kirsten?
We started discussing the general disclosure G410 a long time ago, and it was based on a very good illustration from the standards department that it includes very many lower level indicators, and that very few organizations are today able or willing to report in full on it. And it is a general disclosure, which is a requirement to say that we are in accordance with the G4, which means that literally no organization is in accordance with G4 today. I think we do need to take the consequence of that there is too much detail in this general disclosure. We have to simplify it to include the information that is absolutely necessary for the general disclosure. Other information that could be useful and could be material for some organizations should then be transformed to topics that are undergoing a materiality process. Consequently, I cannot support the option 1 or 2. I might be able to support option 3, but I have had too limited time to evaluate the information. But the option 3 at least seems to be a simplification that could be reachable for most reporting organizations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Daniel?
Yes, so I'm thinking out loud, and what I'm trying to do is to place these options in the context of cases that we've addressed and engaged on over the past. And, obviously one of the problems and nuances between employees and workforce really is this issue of legality and formality. If, some of the companies that we have engaged with would probably have said to you that that there weren't material issues involved with their workforce, but of course there were laborers that were working under almost slave-like conditions that the company really didn't have connection to. But they didn't have connection to these laborers not because they weren't material or because they didn't have control, but because they didn't really seek to have control. They were subcontracted through different organizations. I think as we think about this, to think about real-life examples and thinking about how a company might define its own workforce based on whether it does have control or not, as opposed to whether it should have control or not, might help us maybe with some of the definitions. I haven't chosen yet which option I feel comfortable with, but I'm struggling to place some of the cases that I'm thinking about from experience into one of these options clearly.
Okay, thank you. Dwight?
Yes, as a participant in the task group, the committee, I wanted to supplement a little bit of the report you received. And one of the things, and I think Katya put it in the report someplace, was the extraordinary number of hours that were involved. The last figure I saw was 18 hours or something like that of conference calls, and I think the figure actually went higher than that. And so there's been a lot of time involved. And at the same time, I think there hasn't been enough time in the sense that we were working to a deadline centered around our putting these standards out. And in fact, I think we should have begun much earlier, months earlier, to get this job done exactly right. And I think we need to keep that in mind. We were under pressure, and there are some things, for instance, in the report that don't go explained that should be explained. And I think there's a consensus that's emerging that isn't clearly specified, but I think there is some conclusions that we're on the cusp of making. And so part of this is a timing issue. The second thing is that another element of the report that's, I think, in the report but wasn't provided to you orally, was that we looked at a lot of the terms, and partly the idea was to sort of consolidate the terms. And so we looked at things like staff and workforce and personnel and that sort of thing. And by making it simpler, so you had less terms, but there's basically two terms that are essential, and that's worker and employee. And then the whole thing turns on definitions. And if you use the word employee, you're dealing with essentially a legal construct that is actually precisely defined in a way that every reporting organization will understand and be able to comply with, because it's a legal concept that they are operating under. The problem is the term worker, but you have to use the word worker for a very simple reason. That is the term used in most international labor standards. And if GRI is going to be consistent with international standards, you don't have a choice. You're going to have to use the worker. And if you want to operate in this kind of world, you're not going to be able to sort of define worker in anything other than its general sense, because this is not, I think, nobody's going to recognize the GRI as the authority to be able to define these kinds of words. You have in the ISO sometimes where they will define a word in the context of a particular standard, but they will define it that way and in such a way it doesn't apply beyond the standard. The problem is, in the GRI, first of all, the word isn't going to apply to all of the different standards in the same way. So you have that problem, which is what Kat, you referred to as the scoping problem. But you also have the problem of, and I won't bore you with some of the corner that the ISO has painted itself into with the word risk, but they've gotten into what I think is a difficult problem. But the point of the matter is I think we're left with these two words, and I'm very satisfied with the recommendations on the specific word choices that the committee has made, and in particular with their effort to remove some of these words in the text because they're not really needed, and that also simplifies things. But in the end, everything boils down to the scope of the term worker. And at the end of the day, I don't think there's any alternative but to indicate within the individual standard what is the scope of the word for reporting on that standard. We sort of have been considering three different scopes. One scope, of course, is this notion of core activities. Now, there's a lot of uncomfort with core activities in the sense that it may not, it still is a little vague. It has two advantages, though. One is the term more or less is defined in business usage. So GRI doesn't have to come up with a made-up definition of something. The other advantage is that it allows the reporting organization to provide the basis for subsequently reporting on these worker issues. It describes its core activities in the general disclosure, and then later in reference, when it gets to questions as to a disclosure that talks about workers in the sense of those performing core activities, it can go back to what it has claimed. Now, that I think is so there's two advantages of that, but at the end of the day, if you don't do that, you're left with a problem, and the problem is you can always do employees, but you're not going to necessarily be able to capture some of the impact on development, sustainable development that the organization is doing, because in the area of labor, which is the biggest social impact of an organization, it's going to miss a lot of its impact. So you're still going to have to deal with this issue. Now, it may be that in terms of the general disclosure, the idea of reporting on employees and indicating that there's a big ocean out there might be the thing for the general disclosure. We recommended the other one because the other view of shared of core activities sort of captures some of the impact, but it would be more difficult to do. We also looked at 3 scopes, and I think this is, and there might be more scopes, but one is this notion of the core activities. The second scope, which appears in option 2, was originally developed out of health and safety. The responsibility of an organization for the health and safety is not the same as the core activities, and it involves a peculiar list of workers. The idea of a workplace that's controlled by the organization gives that organization responsibility for the health and safety of workers performing work, even though they're not being supervised by or they're not employees. So the second option is more about health and safety. Now, there was finally a third option, which isn't an option for a third scope, which isn't an option here because it doesn't need to be. What do you do when you have workers who are impacted adversely by the organization, and they are not employees, and perhaps they're not performing activities that are directly related to the organization? Maybe they're linked to the organization, or they're affected as collateral damage by the organization's activities or something like this. Well, I think that in those cases you have to go to the international standard of the guiding principles in business and human rights, which sets the responsibility for the organization for all people whose human rights are affected, including those of workers, and I think you have guidance there. So that would be 3 scopes for workers that we've identified. There's possibility of more. And in terms of these options, 2 of those scopes are there. And as you know, I'm going to stop now. As a member of the committee, I'm strongly in favor of option 1.
Okay, thank you. Salema?
In some extent, I do support what Kirsten has said about the general disclosure only has to have some general information, and the detailed information should be part of an indicator or SRS, very specific topic. But on the other hand, I also support what Dwight just said about what is related with very complex global supply chains. In some extent, some companies does not have a very huge amount of number of own workers or employees. In some organizations, they do have a lot of suppliers who employs workers working for this organization. So I'm in favor, and because of that, I'm in favor of the option 2. Because I really think that option 2 will reveal in quantitative numbers how the organization, the reporter, is structured in terms of employment. And there's another thing that Dwight just mentioned about responsibility and accountability. In some countries, the health and safety and labor conditions of everybody falls under the organization responsibility. In Brazil, for instance, we do have some slavery conditions in the 3rd or 4th layer of a supply chain, and the main organization that is in some extent using this very long supply chain to outsource their not core activities is being responsible to compensate those workers, to remediate their conditions. It's not only in Brazil, it's a law in several countries. And that's why I'm in favor of the option 2.
Okay, thank you. Ademi?
I think it's important to clarify the definition of the employees and workers. This is the first point. And second point is, in my opinion, it's that definition of the option 1 and option 2 is not so clear. I think it's, especially for reporting organization, it's quite difficult. And also the if we want to have a kind of comparable disclosure, it's quite difficult. But I assume that but at the same time that I think it's important to report some kind of information about the non-employee workers. So then I assume these non-employee workers are employees of suppliers, definitely. So in this regard, kind of my proposal, kind of practical solution is, my recommendation is we request a number of employees in the first tier suppliers fully working for the reporting organization. This is not perfect, but I think a more realistic solution. It's maybe close to the option 2, but in my feeling, it's more clearly defined.
Okay, thank you. Stian?
Two comments. The first one, I agree fully with what Dwight highlighted. The option 2 is very important in terms of reporting on safety performance. Because you as a reporting entity is responsible for everybody that's on your site and falls under your responsibility. And for that reason, option 2 covers that reporting requirement. However, if you simply look at the number of employees working for you, it's the number of people that you pay for as the reporting entity. The others are workers that's on site, and it may be suppliers, it may be outsourced services, but it's still important to know how many people you've got on your site at any given of time. But that does not mean it's the people that you pay for, your employees. So I strongly support what Dwight said. We should look at this at a case-by-case argument where it is necessary. In some cases, you may have to report them collectively. In other cases, you may have to separate them. But for health and safety reporting, option 2 is definitely a requirement in my mind.
So to be clear, so you're supporting option 2?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Kirsten?
An additional comment to option 1 and option 2, and that is what is meant with report the total number of workers who are not employees. How should that be counted? Is it the total headcount throughout the year? Is it the headcount at year end? Is it full-time equivalents, or what is it? It's absolutely unclear to me, and it's extremely difficult to count on any other basis than on hours. Some of these workers will be inside our fence or inside our influence for 2 hours during a year. Others will be there throughout the whole year. And how should that be accounted? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, as I read back and forth between the options, and I always come back to the real-life examples, what I see problematic about both options, 1 and 2, is a little bit about what Kirsten just said, which is that, how do you materially count what is not really part of your formal relationship, given that we're probably talking about a workforce that's beyond the sphere of control of the company, that very well may know that workforce exists, but doesn't have a tangible reach to it. I find some of the requirements in options 1 and 2 probably a bit difficult to grasp. I tend to think that option 3, with maybe some rethinking, might work better, and certainly to bring in a discussion of reporting on materiality, because obviously the company should have an understanding of where the issues may lie outside of the employee relationship that it may have, and reporting on that, I think, would be important.
Okay, thank you. Let's, in the interest of hearing from someone we haven't, Robin?
I have difficulties in this section concerning how you identify the workers, or whatever you call them, which are not on the payroll of the company. And I do appreciate what Dwight said. I mean, the question of safety is a daily issue. So it means that the company having subcontractors, and if you take the case of the nuclear industry, when you build a production unit, you have a lot of subcontractors. And from a safety point of view, you need to record that on a daily basis because you need to know. But it's reporting on a daily basis is not the issue we have in this paper, since we are in a annual cycle. So that's one thing. The second thing is how. And I'm turning back to Stian, to Kirsten. How do you identify? I mean, if you hire the services of a subcontractor, you will need to ask him to disclose on the people there, the hours for each of the team of the subcontracting unit. I mean, honestly, it makes no sense. It really makes no sense. I mean, how we're trying to have a reasonable approach to reporting issues, and there we have something which is very complicated. I mean, and you obviously know that I'm not necessarily on the side to alleviate the reporting by the fund companies, but there I think there's some sort of, we are mixing several issues. And I do understand where option 2 comes from, but in that case, I don't see why we should report on that because we are not at the same time cycle. So that's the issue. So I'm a bit confused about saying what I'm saying. It could mean that I would favor more option 3, but there again, there are other issues. I'm not talking about how you count that. Is it a full-time equivalent head count at the end of the year? I think this could be solved quite easily, but what is the core activity of a company? I mean, so that's, but I'm really not in favor of having, at that level of disclosure, having companies reporting on a workforce which the company does not control from a managerial point of view.
Okay, thank you. So, Judy?
Yeah, just trying to work in my mind through what is actually at stake in terms of choosing one option versus another. And I'm coming up against my perception that we're maybe trying to do too much with the sort of one-size-fits-all on this disclosure. And I mean, just to take the specific example that's been raised with option 2 as a kind of necessary disclosure for health and safety, I wonder, you know, am I wrong in thinking that that part of the standards that deals with the topic boundary should be part of the consideration when you're looking at the specific issue of health and safety? That if you have a requirement under the topic boundary protocol to draw the boundary of health and safety in the appropriate place, I struggle with why we would need to have that provided in option 2 for all companies under all circumstances pertaining to all topics. And I wonder if we're not just sort of trying to put too much into one disclosure. Saying all of that's part of the reason why I think I'm leaning strongly towards option 3 with a few caveats, and I'm sort of you know, open to persuasion on it, but I think it's just the one that is simplest and provides the kind of, what we're looking for is context here as to the nature and scale of company operations, not a kind of specific number that you would compare companies to when you're looking to evaluate performance necessarily. It's about understanding the operation itself. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Salema, I'll get back to you.
I just want to share some methods to count workforce. And there are some financial institutions that are asking for organizations to disclose the number of the workers, employees, contractors, such as OPEC, which is a financial institution linked to the US government. There are other institutions that are making some, putting some effort to regulators to oblige global companies to disclose about the number of the workforce, the total number of the workforce. So I do recognize that it can be very challenging to count the whole workforce, but it's a trend on regulation as well. The other thing is to compare how the organizations are taking advantage of outsourcing their labor issues to underdevelopment countries. It's another kind of information that is very key to several stakeholders, even the financial institutions. There are some financial institutions such as IDB, World Bank, and IFC that are asking to organizations to disclose the size of their workforce within US or Europe or within Indonesia, Brazil, or China. So that's why I stick with supporting the option 2, because it's very in line with whatever it's occurring all around the world in terms of challenging the organizations to be transparent about the number, the size of their workforce within their boundaries, within their geographic boundaries, and outside of their geographic boundaries.
Okay, thank you. Dwight?
First, I want to support the point Judy made. If you have a number of disclosures, and some of them deal with health and safety, then the scope of option 2 would be the correct scope to use for those disclosures, because that is the internationally recognized and accepted view of the responsibility of an organization for occupational safety and health. It's not only their workforce, but it's the people working in places they control themselves, the workplaces. And that gets to the main message. You need to scope workers for the various disclosures. These options that we're discussing is for one disclosure, which is in the foundational part of the thing, and that's reasonable to discuss what we're doing. But when we go on to other disclosures, you don't settle those other disclosures by settling this. And so I think that this option 2 is the correct scope for an occupational safety and health disclosure. It is not the correct scope for this part. And the reason is the people that would be under this option 2 would be, for instance, people who come in and put in machinery from a manufacturer and then leave. That would be, those people would be covered by option 2. Construction workers who come in to remodel the kitchen of the factory are covered by option 2. And this sort of thing. And this is not what you want to capture in this kind of disclosure. So I think option 2 is technically wrong. It's just wrong. But the problem is, do you want to capture just employees or beyond employees? And now that is where we have the challenge, because 30 years ago, I think it would be enough to require reporting on employees. But if we were to take that now as what we want to require, given the nature of the organization and its impact, I think employees is not enough. Now, who are these people? Well, today, a lot of organizations use agency labor. The agency supplies workers in a formal basis, in a commercial contract. The workers are technically employees of another legitimate, recognized organization, yet they're under the direction and control of the user enterprise, and they are often doing the work that the organization would consider its own work. It's the organization's work, the core activities, however you want to describe it. So, and if you can take other kinds of economic organizations that we're seeing today, for instance, take the Uber taxi company. They have a lot of, their work is actually being done by people they are treating as individual entrepreneurs. Now, just to without belaboring this, they're treating them wrong. They're doing a lot of social damage, but that's not the point here. The point is, in reporting, would that organization report on those people or not? In terms of its impact and in terms of the kind of things that we're trying to get with these non-financial reporting. Option 1 would capture that maybe. Option 3 would not. And option 2 is irrelevant. So consider the employees of agencies that supply labor, consider organizations that are treating individual workers as individual entrepreneurs and this and that. And that's why I would recommend 1. My second choice would be 3, and only because we want to keep things simple in this foundational standard. But I think that's really the choice is between 1 and 3. I don't see 2 as being a realistic choice.
Okay, thank you, Dwight. Just a reminder that, part of our context for our transition from the guidelines to the set of standards is that we weren't going to change the content. And so part of this conversation strikes me as potentially viewed, may not be, but it could be potentially viewed by others as we're changing the content by this defining, and Dwight, to your point, I don't think there's any argument around the table around using the universally accepted or generally accepted terminology of definitions of worker employee. So that's a given. I think the challenge that we have here is what are we going to settle on as the scope for this disclosure in the general section with regard to this question of workers and employees. So we need to keep that in mind that if we are, I would view, at least potentially, any of these 3 options beyond the one that we have, option 0, which is make no change, and then take that as a point of future work for us as workers to undertake in terms of modifying it and making it more palatable to businesses and more possible, I wouldn't say palatable, possible to report on, because there are some significant limitations on how one would go about collecting all this universality of who has been a worker associated with a particular company. But so, we'll go around again. We're starting to hear the same things over again. So, if you have something new to add, good, because at some point we'll have to decide how we're going to address this. So, Stian, and then Michael.
Thank you, Eric. It's Stian. In terms of if this is to support the foundation disclosure, I will go with option C. There is a question about option C, 3, yeah. Sorry. There is a question about D under option 3, report whether a substantial proportion of the organization work is performed by workers who are not employees. And that's a yes or no answer. It doesn't require you to give a number, and that goes back, for example, what Kirsten said, an individual from outside can work for 2 hours or he can work for 8 hours every day. So it's very difficult to differentiate the number and the length but that is easily captured under option 2, where you have to report your recordable case rate or your injury rate, as an example, where you record the hours for both your employees and the workers. So in support, I think the best to address the foundation disclosure is option 3. Thank you, Eric.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
I mean, this is an area that I have no topic-specific knowledge in, so I sort of come back to the general principles, and sort of like Judy did, I guess. What's the information need of the readers of the report? And it seems to be quite varied according to, industry, culture, country, what specific thing you're going to use it to report on down the track, etc. So given those variations, I guess I'd come back to whatever flexibility you need at this top level in the 101 standard and go for, I guess it's option 3, which seems to offer the most flexibility. But I then would want to see, and I guess this is intended anyhow in the guidance, that there's a discussion of these things that have been said here, and possibly have a reporting requirement. It's not just report weather, but something about disclose, the nature, anyhow, it's delve a little bit deeper onto what it means for this organisation in its particular circumstances and the readers of its sustainability report.
Okay, thank you. Nkrumah?
Sorry, I like to say that, sorry. Yeah, I like to say that we are looking at the option 2 only with the health and safety. That is not correct. See, the impact occurs beyond health and safety. Let's take in case of working hours. The non-core workers put in more working hours. They are payment of wages. They get impacted on the payment of wages. And when it comes to the forced and the bonded labor, it is the non-core workers who are impacted. So when we look at the impact beyond health and safety, it is good to disclose at least the fraction or the percentage of core to non-core workers, so that we know the readers can seek more information and the companies can be transparent in disclosing whether there are any other impacts beyond health and safety. But as a foundation standard, I will still prefer to go for option 3. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ademe?
I think that Judy and I have been much longer up than...
All right, so this is I'm trying to recall our protocol. It was a pounding of it that you wanted to, get the attention of the chair. So Kirsten, go ahead.
Okay. Just additional comment to the health and safety data. We do for calculating them, we do not need the total number of workers. We need the total number of hours, which probably for very many organizations are taking from the financial accounts, and they do not give any information about the relative share of gender for these hours, which means that is very difficult to collect. In addition, using my company as an example, our Norwegian unions absolutely opposed to give information about gender related to health and safety due to privacy reasons. So we are not able to report on that. I think that should be taken into account, that there are also privacy issues related to such kind of information.
Okay, thank you. Judy?
Just two very quick points. Eric, just to your point a moment ago about holding true to what's in G4 and not making changes outside of G4 as far as possible, which is a key promise of this process. I think to that extent, option 3 is the one that most closely holds to what's in G4. So for that reason, I think that would be the best one. I'd also want to point out just something I've only just noticed. Both option 1 and option 3 include a point D, which does not include any numbers requested, but then the last lettered item of each of these lists ask for report any significant variations in the numbers reported for A through D, such as seasonal. So I just want to say that includes a list of something that doesn't include a number. So there's just something that needs to be rewritten in the draft. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Ademe?
Okay, among these options, I think option 3 is only relatively clear for the reporting organization. I think if we want to go with the option 1 or 2, I think we need to explain more. So maybe I recommend to create a list of examples, what we want to have as, reported. For example, maybe the workers in a reporting organization's factory, or the workers in accounting functions outsourced, or something like that. Maybe by having this kind of example that the situation will be clearer.
Okay, thank you. Robin?
Two things. I mean, Are the people, would you say that in English, are in interim included in the head count? Because for me, as a French person, when I read full-time and part-time, it doesn't specify whether interim people are in or not. For me, they would not be. So maybe that should be specified. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is because there again, I mean, a company has authority on these temporary workers, although they do have a commercial contract with the companies who provide for these working force. As for those with the companies with whom companies might contract, and there again, the case of the nuclear industry is huge because most of the workers are subcontracted. When you build an energy production unit, there again, they have no control on it. So at that level, the general disclosure, I do not understand why the group has been discussing option 2, 1 or 2, although I do understand Nankuma's concern. Of course, having low-paid people makes pressure on the. That I understand perfectly, but I don't think that indicate or that standards. It's the way to approach the issue you're raising. So, I mean, there again, I think like Judy or Kirsten or I think it's John. I think we should stick, for all sorts of reasons, stick to option 3. But there again, I don't understand how you can cover and measure and get the information when you have a classical hiring contract, whether it could be consulting, by the way. I mean, when you're a consultant, you provide workforce to your client, a company. But I mean, you don't. The company doesn't count the workforce you provide him with in its head count.
Okay, thank you. David. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I told Daniel he was next. Daniel, go ahead.
So I'm going to bring us back again to examples because I think that when we discuss options 1 and 2, I tend to hear discussion more about the employees at a company's facilities, but I could think of 2 typologies where that wouldn't be the case, and then options 1 and 2 really don't work. And the 2 that I would mention, without naming any companies in specific, but let's say company A produces soccer balls and it knows that there's a huge problem with child labor in homes of people who sew balls and then deliver them to the company. How would you fit that into options 1 and 2? I don't see that as possible. Another example would be seasonal labor related to picking fruits, for example, that are not at the company's facilities, but those fruits are picked off-site and then brought to the company for processing. How would you fit that sort of model into 1 or 2? I don't see that really happening because the company really doesn't have control over what's going on beyond its borders. That doesn't mean it doesn't know that there's an issue that is material that has to be reported on. I don't see it being able to report not necessarily numerically about how many people are engaged, but I do see the company having to disclose the fact that it is a material issue that has to be addressed in some way that it should do through its reporting.
Okay, thank you. David Russell?
Yeah, David here. I've got a lot of sympathy with the underlying discussion around this because there are big social issues that are pushed out beyond the workforce to people that do work for organizations. And I think this is an area that we need to address in the future to better assess this and allow to provide support for organizations to report on this. I don't think we're ready to do that today, and I don't think looking at the core aspects of an organization really addresses where many of these social issues are. With regard to the things that take place within a fence line, of course organizations are very much responsible for health and safety, but again, that doesn't address many of the social concerns that are underlying the thought process here. And from a practical point of view, the only option of these three that is realistic at the moment is option 3, but I don't think that really addresses the issue either. So I would say if we only have these 3 options, then option 3 is the one that I would support. But having a yes/no, a substantial proportion of my organisation's work is carried out by workers who are not employees, doesn't really say very much, because it may not be a substantial proportion. I would like to see an approximate proportion disclosed. But my support at the moment is for option 3, but I think we need to come back to this at a future date and really address the issues underlying this disclosure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dwight.
Yeah, a couple of points I'd like to respond. When Kirsten mentioned the problem of gender, it reminded me also of the problem of region. And the committee did not see it as its remit to deal with the issue of region. But there is this problem in region that isn't for this discussion, but basically, are you talking about a part of a country, or are you talking about a part of the world? And the issue in this case, and the only thing that is possible to make sense, is the nation. It's at the national level that the meaning of employee is determined. So region is a little questionable, but that's not for this discussion, but I thought I'd mention it. Daniel, when you made the example of soccer balls or the other supply chain issues, and you said it would be difficult to see how it would be in 1 or 2. Well, it may be, but in fact, it's not in 3 at all. So 3 doesn't overcome that. 3 walks away from that that question. And the question then is, how are you going to capture this or not? And option 3, I think, is worth looking at from the point of view of the context of the foundational thing, but I think there needs to be 2 things raised about that. And one, of course, is what David just raised, which is, what do we mean by substantial? And are we going to provide any guidance for reporters on that? The other problem is the problem of organizations' work. And generally, that problem is you would have to define that term unless you went to core activities, which has a common understanding and a self-definition. I would predict 12 to 16 years in order to achieve a definition of organizations' work. So I think we should start right now. It's not going. The result is not going to be credible, and it would result in a number of problems, I think, for GRI if you started dealing with issues that are not really capable of being dealt with right now by other more authoritative bodies in this thing. That's why I think the idea of taking a term such as core activities, which is understood by businesses, asking them to define it as they would, and then base that as the measuring thing for reporting, I think gets into that. I don't think that if we were to go for option 3, first of all, I don't think we would be bound by the term organizations work. Second of all, I don't think we should use that term. I think we should use core activities, and that would, I think, make option 3 credible. But I think we would need to consider that.
Okay, we seem to have exhausted ourselves with regard to conversation. So I think, if I could, I think where we are is that we aren't in I don't sense a emerged consensus here with regard to any of the currently defined options 1, 2, and 3. with the possible exception of what, Dwight, you just alluded to, which is if we were to modify option 3 so that option 3D is making reference to and again, we can quibble with the terminology, substantial portion of the core activities of the organization is performed by workers who are not employees as a non-quantified disclosure, but a statement with regard to the organization's belief that, yeah, we have a bunch of individuals who are engaged in our core activities. I have my own concerns about core activities because while I can look up on Google what that term is defined in various fashions, I'm not sure it actually gets to the issue because I think there are many organizations would define their core activities of not including precisely the sorts of individuals that you're describing are at risk, and that's one of the problems there. But we do need to decide what we want to do, and as I see it, we do nothing and carry forward as G410 is currently described, which isn't on one of these options, but it is an option. So we make no change and then elicit whatever commentary we get from the comment period with regard to the fact that we've ignored a big issue and so on. Or we modify 1, 2, or 3 as presented to something that we can reach a consensus on, with a fundamental belief that it is intended to help clarify what was originally intended in G4, trying to keep true to no content change and make a practical consideration, practical change to try to elicit what we're after. So I guess what I'm proposing is it possible to, maybe not precisely define the words in the collective here right now, but would we get a consensus that with some modification that option 3, could be something that we could go forward with at least through the comment period. Simeon, I haven't heard you.
Okay. I have been quiet so far because the points have been covered by others, but I just want to offer a bit of experience in recent months, actually, in the region that I work in. There has been some discussions on the notion of the issue of using contracted staff in a prolonged period of time. Then that refers to colleagues who sit with you day in, day out for prolonged period of time, meaning years. And they are perceived as colleagues and employee of the company, but they actually do not contribute to the headcount. They are not subject to the benefits or any of the benefits that you get as an employee of the company. And at the end of the day, when there's turnover, they're not counted as well. And the problem are twofold. One is companies do use that strategy for various reasons, some practical, some good, some bad. And then the second issue is the turnover rate tends to be very fast. And they're very difficult to replace that sort of experience and expertise built up by these sort of workers. Now, I think companies such as ourselves have over the years used GRI and have come to an understanding of what that means when we have to present the company organization profile. And that is actually a big issue, how to address what I just said, workers in a company who are perceived as colleagues, but are not really. So I think in the spirit of what was discussed just now, I would actually recommend not changing anything at this stage, because any changes that we put forward is going to lead to the sort of questions and discussion that we just had, and not just within this room, but with all the people who are using GRI in the future. So until we have had time to really flush out all the issues, why not just take what was in G4 and put it forward? Companies have come to some sort of consensus how to report to this particular indicator. I think it's the wrong time to rock the boat in any way.
Okay, thank you. Dwight?
Yes, I'd like to respond to that. Part of creating the technical committee to look at this and to simplify it came up with the recommendation of removing certain terms that were confusing, such as staff and workforce and things like that. And I think that even if we were to take the general approach of not changing too much in G10, we would have to look at the text and try to get rid of words like workforce and things like that to bring it in line with some of these other recommendations of the task group. So I think that even the best of circumstance should be to change some of this in G10, if not all of it. I also would like to recommend that maybe we stop this discussion now and revisit it maybe tomorrow so that people can let this perk a little more. And I think it's a very complicated subject and one that has lots of nuances and one that's extremely important. And it's one of the more important things we'll be doing during this meeting. So we've had a very good discussion. Can we revisit this tomorrow?
Of course. Salema?
Actually, I was thinking about the fourth option. That would be whatever Simon already said about let's keep it with the G410 as it stands, and let's have more time to discuss the other options that are, in some extent, modifying the content of the G410. So I do support of the solution provided by Simeon, or if it's agreed by the majority of members, we can revisit the subject tomorrow. But I will stand to, I'm keeping supporting the option 2 in this case.
Okay. So, did you have a further comment? Dwight? No. Okay. We need to decide, and we could decide not to decide, which is perfectly fine. But do we have so how do others feel? Do we want to take our breath and reconvene on this, and we'll reopen the public session tomorrow afternoon? Or do we want to try to plow through and see if we can reach a consensus yet today? What's the sense of the board?
Sorry, it's Daniel.
Yes, Daniel.
Just wondering, judging by the complexity and sort of nuance of this discussion, whether, given the technical committee had spent somewhere around 18 hours on this already, whether then it's actually even reasonable to expect that having another chomp at the bit, as it were, sort of tomorrow will lead us to consensus around one of these options, or option 0 or option 4. So I just wonder whether perhaps actually we're better off agreeing now whether it's, what the expectations might be of another session, and whether that's at all reasonable to expect consensus at another session.
No, so I agree. I mean, that is part of the issue. You turn off your, Bastian, you were going to, no. Judy.
Just a quick point of clarification. When we talk about the option of doing nothing and reverting to the G410 text, if you look at what's on page 3 of item 6 addendum, you can see quite clearly that there's language that's been agreed by the technical committee that is not controversial as far as this conversation we're having is concerned.
Correct.
When you talk about reverting to G410, do you literally mean just sticking with what's in G410, or do you mean accepting the uncontroversial changes? Because we're having a problem with the putative items D and E in column 2, not with A, B, C, or F in column 2. So could you just clarify what you mean by?
Yeah. So thank you for this this intervention. What I intended was that we would incorporate the other, as you said, non-controversial changes to the use of the word employee and word worker in the existing G410 disclosure. But but what we're talking about goes into the other items, beyond the, I think it's A, B, and C, isn't it? Or, yeah. So, yes, thank you for that clarification. Okay, I'm not, Jürgen, please.
I recognize that this is very difficult to decide, and all colleagues have good arguments on their side. I do doubt that we tomorrow are in a different situation. That we can, if we postpone it to tomorrow, we can get to a better result than today. So I plead for taking a decision today, which will be difficult. And I do have a real headache when we, on the one hand, recognize that reality changed and the GRI decides we do not deal with that. We play like everything would be like 30 years ago. We know that the global process in all organizations, more or less, to outsource more and more of their activities, even those who were 10 years ago still considered core activities, are outsourced today. And we also know that the challenges for sustainability in a social and human rights sense, the challenges are, first of all, in these outsourced activities, in these activities done by self-employed, bogus self-employed, whatever, not formally employed staff of the organization. Here are the major problems. So if we don't make the efforts to mirror this new reality and play like we just handle it like in G410 as it was years ago, I don't find that satisfying. No way. I think we can't do that. I understand. I was in favor of option 2 from the very beginning, because my feeling is this shows more than any other option, or gives us the information we need to see reality as it is, to get a real picture. I was in favor of option 2, but I understood that maybe for a foundational standard, option 2 is not the ideal solution for a foundational standard, which is not a principal argument against option 2. Option 2, for me, still is the best option we should choose, but maybe not in a foundational standard. So therefore, my conclusion at the end is, seeing the problems which were, and I do not want to repeat everything which was said, so there's no need, but I see the problems, but still, to come a bit closer to reality of today, I do believe we need to go for option 1 in this context. I do believe so.
No. So, okay. Okay, go ahead, Daniel.
Would it be worth taking a head count to see right now?
I was about to take a straw vote as to where we are.
And maybe it'll help clarify.
Yeah, no,
how complicated
was going to be my next step before the break. We do have, we can take this up again yet today. There is some time in the agenda after lunch on the general disclosures where we could conceivably continue to the extent that we need a break from it, think about it, and then come back. So Robin, small point.
A quick one. I'm uncomfortable with the word core activity. Core. If I take the case of a bank, if you take the case of HSBC outsourcing its information systems, the process, production, is it core or non-core? I have no idea. I would rather stick to its activities or whatever. Because, I mean, again, just to get a sense, a qualitative sense of the outsourcing. And second thing, I'll be ready to have as Daniel expressed, a sense of who's in favor of what.
So, so in that regard, I'm just going to ask for I'm sorry, Katja.
Thank you. There's just one thing I want to also bring to the attention of the GSSB, and that's on the original text of G4 as it stands right now, because that was also discussed. The original text on G410 in reporting points D and E, well, it does include terminology like supervised worker, workforce. These are terms that are not clear. Supervised worker is not used by any other key reference. So, and if I'm just thinking that we also have to still go through the other set of instances for the second batch of draft sustainability reporting standards. And there are also terms like supervised workers in those instances. For now, based on these three options, it was, for example, decided not to use certain terms like supervised worker. If I just want to bring now to the attention that if the decision would be taken to just go with the original text, this would also mean an implication for us how we take this further for the second batch of standards and to rise how the technical community can revise those disclosures. Thank you.
Okay. Dwight.
That's, that point that Katya is raising is why I would recommend that we look at the changes made to, the non-controversial changes made to this, should we decide to go with keeping things the same. And if we decide to go with one of the other options, that would also be those changes. So in any event, I think that losing these terms like supervised workers and workforce will add a lot of clarity and simplicity, and also prevent years of debate in if we should decide to provide guidance as to what that means. So I think Eric, you also mentioned that as a way forward.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is just get a show of hands, if I could, just in terms of each of these options, so that we can get a sense, a collective sense, recognizing that this is not a vote. This is just, the chair would like some clarification as to where we are on this item, whether we have sufficient opportunity to reach an agreement before the end of the meeting. We can put off a final vote till this afternoon. We have time, or if need be, tomorrow. So can I have a sense as to, those board members that would support, as described, option one? Okay. Option two? Option three? Leaving it alone with some modification of the language that we currently have, which is, I would describe as option zero. Not. Would anybody change their view if option three incorporated some modification to item D and E, but item D specifically, to address this on a conceptual level as opposed to on a qualitative level as opposed to a quantitative level with regard to item D of option three? Does anybody view that as a telling on their view as to whether they support option one or two?
Can I just make a comment?
Yes, Daniel.
No, I was just going to say that that last question of yours, I think probably we all have issues with each of the options. So if we went with an idea generally and we're willing to open up and discuss the sub points, I think that would be great. I could go with option, some of the other options if maybe one of the paragraphs were different.
Okay, well, that makes it more complicated. Okay, so I have a sense, I suggest that we take our break and we'll revisit this this afternoon under the general disclosure. So if we could, take a 15-minute break, we'll reconvene at 10 after the hour and take up with the next item